Hello and welcome back to the next video in our Lorgar series. This is the second part and the final part where we're going to go through some of the details. And this is where we left Lorgar last time. We've done the metallics, or at least the silvers, and we've done the red armour as well. What we're going to focus on today is all those little details that can be quite time consuming. So first things first is every piece of parchment on him, all the ribbing in between armor joints, and all the leather elements are going to get a white base coat. This is Army Painter's matte white. This will need 2 thin coats over the entire model, and I would really suggest keeping them nice and thin. If you have to do a 3rd coat, then do it. And the reason for that is because the runes and the writing are actually sculpted into all the parchments here, so you don't want to lose details when we use our speed paints a little bit later, which is why it's important to keep paint thin. We're going to use Pallid Bone, which is a great colour for all things parchmenty as well as all things bony. And on all the parchment areas, I didn't thin this. This is just straight from the pot. On all the parchment areas, we give this a coat of Pallid Bone. If you want to darken it down, of course, you can use the 2nd coat. And if you want to darken particular areas like the underneath the parchments, or where the parchment flows in particular places, then you can use a 2nd coat of this as well to add shading. And I think I went back and used a 2nd and 3rd coat of this paint, particularly in areas where it was darkest. But really nice, and the benefit of using a speed paint here is that it goes into all the nooks and crannies and goes into all those areas where the writing has been sculpted in, and I leave it like that essentially. I don't really go back and kind of fill that writing in again with any black or brown paint. The speed paint does the work for me, and it's up to you whether you want to kind of further highlight it with a white or an ivory perhaps. All those kind of like parchment elements. We're going to use Hardened Leather, and if you've seen any of my videos before, this is my go-to paint for whenever I do kind of any leather holsters or anything like that, or handles. Absolutely fantastic. You can see the kind of the colour that one coat will produce. I tend to do 2 coats with this Hardened Leather, and the 2nd coat only once the paint is dry. If this is the first time you've tuned into these videos before, I make a lot of use of the speed paint range. I think they're excellent and they flow really nicely. Grim Black, I use this in all of the areas where we've got the kind of the rubber tubing, I guess, in between armor plates, and giving it a base coat of white. Just make sure that all the edges stand out, so you don't have to go back and highlight in each individual ribbing element. This is great in particular. I've used this on World Eaters before, on the black on their on the cabling on the front of their armor, and it works really well for that. As long as you're neat and you're tidy when doing this. Just be careful, don't want to slop it all over and get it on that armour that we've worked really long on, so make sure just take your time on this one. But I will not do any more work on that ribbing from there, and I won't do any more work on the leather elements either. The speed paint does all the heavy lifting for us. We spent a long time on that armour, spent a long time with those silvers, and that's where we can save time on these kind of smaller bits. Next up, so we're going to use Golden Armour speed paint. A really nice tone, I think, for Lorgar here. He doesn't have too much gold on him, but I thought the tone worked quite well. And you may have noticed that I've actually swapped out the head of the mace. I found, every time I painted Lorgar or built him, just the mace that he comes with is a bit of a faff. And there's always kind of casting issues or flash or whatever, so I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to snip it off and replace it with one of the Dark Angel Terminator mace heads, and the scale works really well, and I think that it kind of adds weight to the to the mace in the way that the original one doesn't. Although the original one is super fancy, it is really, really nice. I'd advise on his mace picking out the small details with gold. I think that doing that just makes it look, you know, quite nice. Looks like it is master crafted. And then I've mixed in this speed paint with a little bit of silver, shining silver, and then just doing some further highlighting where the light would hit. And just checking for any more places that might need highlighting. And I did the end of his gun as well, or the handle of his gun, just to pick out another golden element on the other side, and then the tubing, or the end of the tubing on his backpack as well. So we're going to add a little bit of verdigris to that, just to show some patina, just some age. So we've got this green paint and blue paint, and we've got a bit of black as well. And I mix it with a little bit of airbrush thinner. Now, Army Painter's airbrush thinner has a little bit of flow improver in it as well, so it obviously helps the flow of the paint, and it's perfect when you want to kind of create a kind of something that is not quite as isn't quite as dilute as a wash, perhaps, or at least isn't quite as transparent as a wash, but it does flow into the cracks and recesses where we might expect that build up of patina. But this just adds age to the overall feel of the piece, adds interest as well. And I think that, you know, these Primarchs, some of these Primarchs have been fighting for 200 years of the Great Crusade, so I think sometimes it is important to show kind of age and patina. I mean, we don't know how different atmospheres might react with different metallics, etc. So I always think this is quite a cool thing to do. Not on every Primarch, and certainly I wouldn't add sort of a patina, you know, on bluish Primarchs. I certainly wouldn't do it for an Ultramarines character. I certainly wouldn't do it for Leman Russ. But again, we're thinking about colour theory here, and contrast with that red armour, and of course blues and greens contrast with red really, really nicely because they're at the opposite end of the colour wheel. And we'll talk about more about colour theory in a little bit later in this video, but we talked about it an awful lot in the first video, so something to bear in mind. And this is him. Now, I've done the head, as I said in previous videos. I'm going to wait until January to kind of do some more flesh painting with the release of the Army Painter's new range of paints. And you can also see that I've done the cloak as well. Now, this is just, the cloak essentially has just been given quite a rough highlight of a bluish grey. And I've just used the lighting of the coming from the rear and just highlighted it according to where the light would hit. But the Colchizian ruins, what I've done for this is basically just use a straight black paint, nothing, just straight back, just a matte black, and then very carefully painted on the ruins. And I used a few kind of references from the transfer sheet. Originally I had planned on using the transfers, but they just weren't big enough and thick enough. So I painted them on myself. I think that, you know, painting circles, you always got to be careful with to make them look accurate, and you've got to bear in mind the folds of the armour as well. But actually, you do 1 or 2 circles, and then if you make your triangles as accurate as possible and your straight lines as accurate as possible, you know, I think you'll get something that looks quite cool. But also, you've got those overlapping geometric shapes, and I would encourage you to overlap them as much as possible, rather than just having singular ones on his, you know, here and there and dotted around. I think the overlapping nature of the Colchizian ruins really kind of like sells the effect. And then I've just used a series of browns and yellows and then whites to do the non-metallic metal on the bottom of the cape as well. I'd really recommend. That was really straightforward. I just followed the pattern of the cape essentially with the highlights I've done on the black. But I would really recommend using a non-metallic metal on cloth instead of using a metallic paint. It might seem daunting, and there's loads of videos about non-metallic metal, but essentially I just grabbed some browns, some yellows and some whites, and then worked my way through those colours in gradual transitions to be able to get that effect. Right, we're going to look at the base now. So we're going to spend quite a long time on the base because this is what I think sells the ethereal nature of the Lorgar model that we've created. So we've got some white paint, We've got black here as well, and these are the Warpaint range. I've got to the almost to the end of that paint there. You could see oak brown, and then I'll use a slightly lighter shade of, or a very light shade of brown as well. Next up, so monster brown. Actually, I didn't really end up using too much monster brown in reality. But one thing and also dark stone as well. This is a great color actually, really nice, because it's a grey but it's got browns in. And I think that one of the important things is when you're doing stone, I would really try and avoid just using greys. That I know the temptation, of course, is to just be like, oh well, you know, it's obviously stone is grey, but actually, if you look in the wild and go looking at some stones, there's all sorts of colours in stones. And one of the easiest ways to make it look more natural is just to add browns in. That's a really good way to sell kind of a realistic stone effect. And what you can see me doing here, and this is quite an organic process, you know, this is not me being exact, this is not an exact science. I'm just mashing in dark stone, black as a base. So we've got some browns in there from the dark stone. But this is just a very dark base, and then we will build on this. Now, the other thing to consider with this base is that I did want it super dark. You know, I've seen lots of word bearers, for example, with like sand bases, which do look great, but I need to sell the OSL effect a little bit later. So in order to sell that OSL effect, I was like, well, I need to make the base quite dark, but still quite interesting. So we'll see what I do with oils a little bit later. But I think to sell that effect, you really need to try and make the base quite dark in this situation. So we're just doing some further dry brushing here. Nothing too fancy. You could see there that I've just lightened it up with some light browns, added more browns in, bit of white, just to get a natural progression. And actually in the hand, you know, it still looks grey, but it's got those browns, earthy browns in that we want when we're dealing with stone. And every time that we do another layer of dry brushing, I really recommend getting the hairdryer out and just make sure that everything is just completely dry, because you don't want to lift off the paint that you just put on. Think about your light sources. Think about, you know, the underneath of this stone is going to be a little bit darker than everything else. So I try to make sure that I'm not really catching too much the underneath, especially at those later stages. But we will need to, before we do the OSL effect, we will need to glue Lorgar to the base as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but you need to consider, I think, the way in which that you either pin him or glue him to the base. But I just glued him, but I definitely recommend probably pinning him if you've got the time to do it. And then here we've got our final highlight. It looks quite light in the hand, that final kind of dry brushing. You know, we do want we do want to render all the shapes on it with this dry brushing, but actually the next steps that we do will kind of knock this back. And here, you know, we're just adding in a little bit more white into that browny grey mix. So the next step is the really interesting step. So we've got, so far, quite a dark base, but we've got all these Colchizian ruins at the bottom. And I had wondered whether or not to make those kind of like an OSL effect as well, but I thought it would be too much. I thought it would overwhelm the base essentially. So I kind of was like, oh, you know, umming and ahhing about whether or not to make all those Colchizian ruins kind of, you know, OSL. And then I was just like, you know, I really only want 3 spots of OSL, his eyes and then the 2 flaming skulls. And then I think you'd have all sorts of problems if you had OSL ruins around kind of it impacting on him as well. So I'd have to consider quite carefully the way in which the ruins are creating light and then how that would then look on him, you know, how that would hit the cloak, how that would hit the side, how it would hit the underneath elements of him. So, you know, I did agonize over it. So, but I went for an alternative instead of doing kind of an OSL effect. I did want to kind of demonstrate moss, or I guess like a build up of grime and dirt within those ruins that would pick them out rather than just being kind of dry brushed. But we'll do that on the next step. So the skulls. So essentially, we take, you know, a khaki color, essentially, bit of ivory, bit of brown, bits of black, quite similar to that stone color that we were using before, and then we just highlight all the skulls. And we can be quite rough with this. Certainly, we can. The skulls that are going to be on fire with flaming green fire, we can be quite rough with. But you can see me here mainly just using a stippling motion, and every time that I stipple, I'll then go to another skull and another skull and another skull, and then I'll come back to the first skull, and by that point it will be dry. But I'm stippling according to the light. So in the first video we talked about a directional light coming from the front, and then a light coming from the rear as well. So consider that when you're doing your skulls. You can see me just bringing in ever so, you know, even more tightly. We get tighter and tighter and tighter with these little highlights, and just use a little stippling motion is the way I would advise kind of working on skulls like this. And then we just go to the tippy top highlights on the top of that skull just to really sell that effect. And then the candles I've just done with exactly the same colour. Doesn't need to be too much definition between the two, because the OSL effect will mean that if we had a difference between the two, it will kind of get rid of it. So I didn't worry too much about it. You could use red candles if you wanted to, but I really wanted a difference between the red model of Lorgar and then a greeny base, just to maximise the contrast between the two. So I didn't want to interfere with that contrast by adding in red candles. So the fun part, we're going to use some burnt umber. We are going to use some cobalt violet hue, and the most important one, we're going to use some emerald green. Now you could use a slightly darker version of green. I think I just had emerald green next to me, so I decided to use it. But what I kind of wanted to show was an element of age. I wanted to give the whole base kind of a greeny appearance, but also, I suppose, you know, simulating kind of a build-up of moss as well. Now there are loads of moss products on the market, and actually, if you wanted to kind of, you know, a moss effect, you could just use some watered down war paints and, you know, go into all the crevices. But I decided to use oil paints. I thought it would be an interesting way to kind of tint the whole base to make it kind of like that green, to give it a green effect. I thought it'd be interesting more than anything, just to simulate, you know, an ethereal nature about the base as well. But the tinting was the most important thing for me. But it also allowed the oils to go into all the crevices, as I was describing before, into the Colchissian ruins. So although it's not OSL, they'll still be picked out in a green. And I think the thing about the Primarchs is that we can do weird and wacky things like this. We've got the space, the scope to be able to do it, to play around with colour theory, to do some quite fantastical things in a way that we don't always have the ability to do with, say, a Mark 6 or a Mark 3 Marine. You know, there's just less places to play with, less space to play with as well on these. And who am I to say what planet he's on, right? You know, what kind of stones that they have on these planets. Perhaps these stones are, you know, tinted in a particular way. The physics of our planet and the nature of our planet is going to be very different to perhaps other planets as well. And then you can see this is completely dry. So it's got a green, kind of an overall green tint to it. It's picked out the Colchissian ruins quite nicely as well, but it's going to be important for the contrast a little bit later. And then here I've just painted the skull, the flaming skull tops, just a white colour, and then the inside of those eyes as well, a white colour. And then I've just done a couple of layers of green with a brush. Okay, so you didn't need to see me do that because I just painted it essentially with a brush. A couple of layers, just leave it till it's dry, probably about three layers to get a decent coverage and decent coat. And then we're going to use this Gauss Green straight through the airbrush. Now you can see I've added Lorgar to the base here. This is really critical because you will get overspray on him. So you can't leave him off the base at this point because you'll have something where you've got this OSL effect created from the skulls on his base and then it not touching him, which will look super bizarre. So unfortunately with this base you can't leave Lorgar until the very end. You'll need to add him on at this point where we're going to add on the OSL to affect those kind of flaming skulls. And then here I'm just giving this quite a not too much of a tight highlight. Actually, this is not very tight at all. But essentially, what I'm doing is just giving it a blast around the skull and around the surrounding areas to sell the OSL effect. Now, you could just leave it like this. We're going to sell the effect even further and make it shine even further. Yeah, this would be enough. And then I'm also hitting the base underneath to give another, again, an ethereal look to the overall base. Okay, so again, we've got the layer of the oils with the green, then we've got this kind of green OSL effect coming from underneath and coming from the skulls as well. So next up, we're going to use white. So we want the appearance that kind of the inside the skull is the hottest part of the skull. So we need a more intense colour at this point, and we're going to use neon yellow by the Army Painter to do this, but initially we just use white at the bottom, and this again is quite rough. So we're going to take our neon yellow here, and then just over that bit where it transitions between the white and the green, but particularly with a focus on the white, we're just going to hit our neon yellow in there just with a brush, and this will take again 2 or 3 coats to build up a color. What you find with lots of fluorescent paints is that they are can be quite thick and gloopy, but they are quite translucent paints, which is perfect for OSL effects but not great for coverage. So it's really important that we build it up in thin coats. And then finally we're giving this just a really tight highlight. Not that you can see it very well, you can see Lorgar's baldy head. A really tight highlight just on the around the kind of the skull area where the part where it would be the most bright, or the brightest part rather. And then that is the OSL effect. That's it. That's all we'll do for this. So you've got a bit going onto his base as well, and then finally we'll just at the tippity tops of those flames, just to sell the effect even more, we'll just give it a dry brush of just some pure black. Don't go mad with this, just pick out the ends. You don't have to go all the way down the bottom, just the tops, to kind of give the effect that it's kind of a smoky effect, a sooty effect, I guess. And then this is it. Now, just a final thing to say, what I've done is I've also just glazed some of that Gauss Green over his shins, and particularly focus on the metallic areas just to reflect it. You don't have to do that, but I think it just sold the effect even more, just the fact that it's illuminating his armor, particularly on the silver areas as well. And then that is the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. It's not often that I do kind of 2-parters, and I thought this would be kind of quite a special video because we're looking at Primarch and going through some of the key features of the main areas of the Primarch as well. Hopefully it's been useful to you. Hopefully the OSL and the discussions about colour theory and the process behind it has been useful for you guys as well. If you like the video, I would really appreciate it if you gave me a comment, and make sure you subscribe as well, and I shall see you on the next one. And I think the next one's going to be some Age of Sigmar.